This video is for educational purposes only and should not be considered financial or investment advice. Hello, everybody. Thank you once again for tuning into the Monero podcast. As always, I'm your host, John, and today we're here to talk about my plan or my strategy for retirement. I know retirement for a lot of people is a scary word, especially in my age or demographic. We are not so concerned with retirement quite yet. I'm only 26 years old. I plan to retire possibly by the time I'm 65, or that's kind of the idea. That's almost 40 years from now. So with that in mind, why even worry about it at all if you're going to worry about it? I want to tell you guys my plan, my strategy. It's not necessarily advice. It's just this is what I'm doing. Take of it what you will, and I'm sure you'll learn something from the strategy I've chose to employ as well. So what exactly is that strategy? So I am familiar with a few things. That's the silver market, and that's now newly the bond market. And the bond market is something that'll probably always be around because governments or institutions, corporations, municipalities, they like to borrow. And it's easy to commit to projects for civilian infrastructure or for a big spending bill, whatever it be, if you can borrow. You're not able to cover the deficit for how many taxes you collect, then you borrow from institutions or you borrow from investors. That's usually how it works for a bond. Silver, it's very simple. You buy silver. You could expect that in the future it'll be more expensive. So you buy it when it's cheap. You sell it when it's expensive. There you go. That's pretty simple, right? So how do we kind of fuse these things together into what would be a tangible retirement account, but something that's not something that is self-propelled and not adjacent or attached to an institution that's going to make money simply by managing something like this, which that's totally fine, but that's just not what I choose, because if they're going to take, a small percentage every year and I'm doing something for 40 years, they're taking a chunk of my retirement simply because I didn't want to manage it. But this is my decision, so this is what I've chose. With that in mind, I have a 3-tier plan for my retirement, and it kind of goes a little bit deeper in a little bit, but we'll get into that. What I'll say first and foremost is this: bonds, silver, rare earth minerals, and have a strategic mineral reserve for the United States through a trust fund. That's kind of my plan. So bonds are a type of investment that basically works like this. I go to I have a Treasury Direct account. I'll just tell you exactly how it is. I have a Treasury Direct account. It's a government institution. It's the Treasury, right? The United States Treasury. They offer bonds, bills, or notes. Some other products as well. But I go to them and I say, hey, I'd like to buy a note. I'm going to do a 10-year note. This is the exact specific one that I'd like. It's going to be a 10-year note. It's going to have a 4.375% interest rate. It's going to be in denominations of $100. So that means I can do 100, 200, a million, 200,000. It can't, whatever. It has to be a denomination of at least $100. And then twice a year after the first 6 months, I get an interest payment. So, for example, my case would be this. I want to buy a 10-year note, which is a bond, but because it's a shorter term, it's described as a note. So I buy a 10-year note from the Treasury Direct. And then after 6 months, I get my first interest payment. And then another 6 months, I get my second interest payment. I hold that note for 9 years and 11 months, or about 10 years, basically. And then after that, they give me my money back. So I bought, say, for example, $200 worth of this bond, or worth of this note. I get that money back in the future. It's just they hold on to it, they use it, and in that way I get interest payments when they say, hey, we'll pay all your money back to you at the end. To be able to use your money, we're going to pay you interest payments. That's basically how the bond market works, all right? So, and that's part of the national debt as well. I've already made a video about the national debt where I've gone into a much deeper explanation of what the problems with that is. You can actually find that right here. There you go. Click on that video, the $39 trillion problem. But back to what we're saying today. So I'll get into my 3-tiered plan in just a second, but I want to show you some information about the precious metal market. So it's kind of the why, which is precious metals as an investment vehicle. As you can see on screen here, boom! From 2010 to 2020, the price of gold increased. From 2010 to 2020 for silver, it increased, but a very small amount. And for copper, it actually went down in that 10-year period. However, if you contract for the United States dollar, between 2010 and 2020, we experienced about 18.84% inflation, meaning if you're a holder of cash between 2010 and 2020, you lost almost 20% of your value by doing nothing. That's called depreciation. So the reason you put your money into an investment vehicle is because it protects against inflation. Simple as that. If gold is going to go up, say, an average of 1 to 2% a year, but inflation is going to go up 3% a year, you would say, well, even if I put my money into gold, inflation is going to outpace that investment. Okay, so let's say you have a savings account that probably gives you about 1 or 2% a year, sometimes more. You can have a high yield savings account that maybe has 4 or 5%, right? The idea is that you need to put your money somewhere over time to keep it from being affected by inflation. Simple as that. So let's look at from 1970 to 2026. So the past 56 years, basically. So gold in the 1970s was about $36 an ounce, right? Real cheap, but obviously the United States dollar had different buying power at that time as well. However, for present day, gold, well, not exactly, not the exact time of this, but when we got our data from, I believe it was in April or March, gold was about $4,700. So let's look at the percent increase over time. Between 2010 and 2020, there was a 45% increase in the price of gold. Between 2010 and 2020 for silver, it was a 1.41% increase. So not incredible. Copper lost 18% of its value, and the US dollar lost about 18% of its value as well. However, let's look between a larger time frame, because this is the conclusion we're drawing from this data, is that precious metals are a long-term buy. If you're going to buy metals, you do not expect to get your value back in a decade. You're expecting multiple decades to compound. Because the difference between making 45% in 10 years or hanging on to it for 56 years, like if you bought gold in 1970, it would be a 12,975% return on your investment. And if you bought silver in 1970 and you held it until today, it would be a 4,916% increase. And likely for 1970 as well, if you held copper and held it until today, 2026, you would have an 862% increase. And finally, if you held United States dollars in cash from 1970 to 2026, your cash now has 760% less buying power. So, like I said, the conclusion to draw from this data is that over time, gold, silver, copper, precious metals in general will appreciate, number one, and are better investment vehicles than the United States dollar over time. You can choose whatever you'd like to, but the long-term investors are going to look towards precious commodities. Silver, gold, platinum, copper, steel, tin, aluminum, whatever. If you can use it for something and it's going to have value or perceived value in the future, then it will have enough value for you to invest in it now. And that's what I'm choosing to do. So this is my 3-tier plan, that way that we can finally get into this. So the first thing is we're going to buy 10-year notes every month. For now, I'm going to buy, well, we'll get into this in a little bit, but for now, I'm going to buy a $200 10-year note every month. So that means that in 6 months, I'll get my first interest payment. However, because I'm buying them every single month, basically for the rest of my life until I retire, that means that after the first year, I'll be getting an interest payment every single month. So what do I do with that interest? Do I just save it? I could reinvest it. I could buy other bonds. You know what I'm going to do instead? I'm going to invest in gold and silver, or other precious commodities if I can afford them once the time comes. So that means that basically I say, here is $200. I'm going to give it to the United States government to use. The government says, thank you very much, John. We are going to give you, for the next 10 years, $175 in interest. I already did the math on this. Quick thinking, right? So that means in 10 years, I get not only my $200 back, but I also got twice a year, up to that point, I got $175 at the end of it. So that means I almost doubled my money just giving them money and doing nothing. All right? Passively. It cost me $200, and for the next 10 years, I get a check. Simple as that. And like I said, if you buy them a lot, you'll get multiple checks. So you'll have a good amount of money to invest in silver and gold or whatever else if you'd like to. However, we can go a step further with this. So then you say, okay, John, that's your retirement. I get you. You bought bonds. And you're using that interest to buy silver and gold. That's not a bad idea. But then you have all this silver and gold. You probably had it at a pretty good price since you've been buying it for the last 40 years. What now? Many people would say I could just sell that silver and gold at a good profit because, hey, if I had it for, if we're talking with the numbers we've had already from the 56 years, let's say, maybe 10 years less of that, I could still experience an incredible margin of return. So I say, yeah, I'm pretty satisfied with that. Let's go a step deeper. My plan is to then found a company that can manufacture critical hardware or infrastructure for technology, AI centers, or medical research, or biotechnical research, or space advancements, anything that uses these critical minerals for infrastructure. And that's why we would divest not just from silver and gold, but we could also do things like cobalt and yttrium and platinum and other platinum-based metals or rare earth minerals, which we'll get into a little bit. So we have all these things. We can then manufacture products and sell those products with metals that we have bought at such a low price decades before. That basically multiplies our markup, and the rate of return on that, if you're instead saying, I'm just going to buy a piece of silver, manufacture it into something and sell it on in that way, sure, you can do that and you can experience a markup. But if you bought that silver when it was a fraction of the price decades before, your markup is even higher. So with that, in that regard, the usefulness of your investment gets multiplied simply because you're not just selling it, you're then using it and selling it, which, that's kind of the plan for any, business haver anyway. So then the idea is that, like I've said, we'll get into critical resources for the United States government. We'll have a strategic reserve once we get large enough, so that way if the United States military or if the United States government said, hey, we need to pull from these reserves and it would affect the global market or it would affect supply chains because we're at war with said country or whatever, it would be easier. It would also reduce dependency on other countries when critical times came in our economy, whether we had global supply chain shortages like I just explained. So the other thing that I can do as well is I could back this up to a trust, and I can have a trust that would do this, and that's the plan as well. Later this year, I'll be starting that trust, and that'll be one of the ways that the trust makes money. Basically, doing the exact same thing that I'm doing. So I've described this so far. I think hopefully you guys get a pretty good idea of what my plan is. But you might ask yourself, John, how's it going? How's it going with that plan? How is it going with that plan? So let me say this. I was going to start this strategy this month, June 1st. I created my Treasury Direct account. I talked to a company called Monument Metals. Shout out to Monument Metals. They're very nice people. I believe I spoke to a lady named Anna. She's very nice. And they are very helpful as well. So why didn't I do this? Why didn't I make the purchase? Why? Because of Donald Trump. Donald Trump has sued the Treasury and the IRS. I don't want to invest in something that's getting sued by the president, number one. Number two, he won. He won that lawsuit, and now he cannot be investigated for tax fraud. There's never been a United States citizen in the history of this country that has ever been able to get that deal to not be investigated for tax fraud, ever. There was never a chief justice of the Supreme Court. There was never a ranking member in any party institution within Congress. Never a person in history. Furthermore, federal spending on Trump's businesses, for golf courts and forcing Secret Service to have to pay for lodging at his hotels, that's just taking money from the federal government or the Treasury and moving it into Donald Trump's bank accounts. Finally, and the biggest discredit, the $1.776 billion slush fund for domestic terrorists. For people that are traitors to this country that incited an insurrection against our government and overtook the Capitol. He wants to pay out domestic terrorists over $1 billion of money from you, the taxpayer, and from the Treasury. So I'll put it this way. I'll be goddamned if I'm putting money in the Treasury at this point. So unfortunately, that's kind of the situation we're left in. I'll put it this way. In conclusion, I will not buy any Treasury notes, bills, or bonds until Trump is out of office. Simple as. Corruption is disenfranchising the average American investor. If you, I'll say this as well, and I've prefaced this at the beginning of the video that this is not investment advice in any capacity. This is simply the story of my investments or what I choose to do for my retirement. With that in mind, I have chosen to take all of my money out of the stock market. A while ago, actually. I've been divesting from the stock market since the beginning of this year. Why? Because it is no longer a game that you can play unless you are either a congressman, work on Wall Street, or have millions of dollars, billions of dollars, and this is the big one, and insider information. No matter what I do, unless I have those things, I am a dead fish in the water of the ocean that is the stock market. There is nothing that I can do to truly participate outside of getting lucky, educating myself enough to eventually get to that point to say, yeah, I'm one of the few that has the power to pull the strings, But unfortunately, that's the reality of the situation. When Donald Trump can just say the words, you should buy a Dell, and then he gives the contracts to Dell, and then you can see that, wow, Dell stock price went up. That's crazy. I will not invest in a stock market like that. And many other people, I'm sure, don't want to as well. Having one person who is insanely corrupt just say the word, and all of a sudden the stock will move in that direction, or, however way. It shouldn't be like that. That's not a free market. This is a free market society. We are a capitalist society, and it's being dictated. It's a command economy. If one person has the ability to overcome all of the market stipulations and just wave his magic wand or his magic finger and say the words, and the markets capitulate, that's a command economy. That is not a capitalist or a free market economy. So I am not going to invest in something like that. There's a reason I don't buy Russian stocks. There's a reason I don't go to Kazakhstan and then say, hey, I'm going to be an investor. I'm going to buy your municipal bonds. Why? Because I don't believe in those institutions, because they're not a free market like we are, or at least not exactly like we are. So if we're not a free market anymore, I'm not going to invest. Simple as that. My goodness. So the key takeaway, here's the key takeaway. I was never taught any of this. While I was in school, while I was a high schooler or a middle schooler, while I spent some time in college, while I've spoken to other people that are in the institutions that are banks or realtors or lawyers or whatever, working with Rotary clubs or with other institutions or with colleges or whoever at this point, clients of a business I've owned, anything. Nobody is giving me or anybody this specific advice. Unfortunately, at this point, I can't say that I'm giving this advice to anybody as well for legal reasons. I can't necessarily give financial advice. I don't have a financial degree. This is just something I've decided for myself, like I said. But this is basically the final key takeaway of what I should say. One is I was never taught this, but two is you need to find your own path. The market, the rules, the sentiment, everything has changed, come and gone. Things are so radically different now. We're going to be experiencing a shift that nobody could possibly understand the exact contrivances of. I can say there's a likelihood of there coming a big shift, another Great Depression moment or a recession possibly or something, whatever it is. I don't know what it'll look like, but something is most certainly coming. Again, this is not financial advice in any way. I'm not saying pull your money out of the stock market. I'm not saying invest in silver. I'm not saying any of that. I'm saying this is what I'm doing, and these are the reasons for it. Simple as that. But that's going to do it for us for today, guys. I very much appreciate your viewership as always. Thank you very much for watching. I will see you guys again very shortly. We're going live on this channel. We're going to be doing some, modded Minecraft. This is the first time I've actually talked about my live streaming in one of the videos. It's usually the other way around. I talk about my podcast in the videos. But like I said, thank you very much for watching as always, guys. Please leave a comment down below. I love to engage with you guys. Adios, mis muchachos. And peace out.